My name is Jari Bolander. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Ethos Podcast. On this podcast, we're going to take a deep dive into the traits, values, beliefs, and skills of all sorts of entrepreneurs to learn how to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient world. Let's get started. Hey everyone, I wanted to jump in quickly and let you know about the release of the audio version of my book, The Entrepreneur Ethos, narrated by David A. Knesser. If you want to support the show, you can buy it wherever audiobooks are sold. Links are also in the show notes. Now on to my guest for today, Dylan Ogline, founder of Ogline Digital, a digital marketing company. Dylan's route to entrepreneurship started at 14, when he started selling cell phones on eBay after reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He scrapped his dreams of winning a college scholarship as a hockey player and instead dropped out of high school to educate himself on becoming a business owner. After many different starts and failures, after his initial success selling cell phones, he was advised by a mentor to focus on one thing. That one thing was his digital marketing company, which he has built over just a few years into a 7-figure business. Though still young, Dylan has put in the time to try and fail, and it's through the lessons he's learned through both coaches and mentors, as well as his own experiences, that has brought him to finally achieving success. He reinforces the teaching that you can't ever give up, drawing on the wisdom of stoics. He also thinks the most important lesson to learn is to never lose touch of what it's like to struggle. It's getting through the difficult times that gives you the strength, tolerance, and growth to eventually succeed. He practices gratitude daily and wants to pay it forward and help others, and now also offers programs to help people start their own digital agencies. Now, let's get better together. Dylan Ogline, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate your time today. I think we found each other through matchmaker.fm, if I'm not mistaken, which is the one I've been getting lots of great guests, which I know you'll also be an awesome guest because we had.
Oh, no pressure now.
No pressure, right? Well, what's interesting, I heard you on Money on My Mind podcast, which I was actually on that one. I was episode 3, and I think you're episode 5. So talking to him, he's a 16-year-old kid out of
he's an awesome kid, man.
Just crushing it. I really enjoyed talking to him, and it's just really cool to see this sort of evolution of podcasting and helping people, and lots of these conversations are really important. So I really appreciate your time. But I really want to understand a couple of things from you. First off, I want to understand how you got to do your business today, which is a digital marketing business. And we'll talk all about that. But before we get in all of that, like I always like to say is, well, why don't you tell me how you got to do what you're doing today?
Sure. So, and that's a long story. So
you got time. Take your time.
Yeah. So I'll try to condense it, I guess. So I started my first business when I was 14. Selling cell phones on eBay. That's where it all got started. And this was really after I picked up a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. My brother had it sitting around, and I read that, and it just sparked the entrepreneurial bug, I guess you could say. Yeah, I also come from a family of business owners and whatnot. And so started that business, and it was actually doing pretty good. I was probably making maybe a couple thousand a month, which when you're that age I was
Oh,
I
you're on
had
top
all
of
the money in the world. Yeah.
You're on top of the world, man.
I didn't know how to spend the money fast enough. And that lasted for a few months, probably about a year, close to a year. And then I got shut down because my merchant account got shut down because they figured out, I think it was around tax time. Like they were like, oh, like we need your date of birth and all this stuff. And they found out I was under the age of 18. So they shut me down. And,
Wow.
but it was just like good timing because this was 2003, 2004, give or take. This was the infancy of Google ads. Really, back then, like a lot banner ads were popular, but this kind of targeted direct response marketing was starting to become a thing. I don't even think Facebook had launched yet. Maybe they had launched. I can tell you, Facebook ads was certainly not a thing.
No, I think maybe Facebook was still on college campuses. I mean, you're probably right. It was infancy. I think MySpace was around, and they were the.
MySpace was huge back then, but MySpace ads, I don't think that ever became a thing.
I don't even. Yeah, I think they figured that out.
they probably had banner ads, but
they probably had banner ads, right?
So towards the end of that business, I started playing around with Google ads and just caught that bug, I guess, and started like reading all these marketing books. I probably picked up 21 or 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which every business owner needs to read that book, and just picked it up from there. And after that got shut down, I spent probably the next 12 years bouncing around from one thing to the next, not getting anywhere, not really having any kind of success whatsoever. At my peak, I had nearly $1 million in debt. I had 10-ish business projects.
Wow.
I was up to my eyeballs in debt. I didn't know what a vacation was. I forgot what sleep looked like. And so it reached a tipping point. And after a conversation with a long-term mentor, I just scrapped everything except for one single project or one single service, which was direct response digital marketing, advertising, management. And in one single business, one single service, just scrapped everything, focused on that. And that was it. And everything started to spin in the right direction after that. That's how I got into what I'm doing.
Wow. So
15, 16 years in 3 minutes.
Well, yeah, it's like I'm the overnight success in the last 15 years, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people. I mean, I'm all for, championing the successes as well as what I like to call survivors, right? Because a lot of people don't survive the entrepreneur journey or not in the way they think they're going to survive it. And so when you see all these famous entrepreneurs, you're like, you feel bad that you're like, oh, how come I'm not doing, $1 million a month or, 6, 7, 8 figures, I should be able to crush this. How hard can it be? And you're literally like just starting out did a course or whatever. And so it is always good to have that perspective that this entrepreneur journey, I mean, it's a lifestyle, right? Like I can't see myself doing anything else. And I'm curious if you ever thought about doing something different than what you're doing right now.
In terms of going down other kinds of businesses, certainly. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, would you own a digital marketing agency? Absolutely not. That's not going to be a thing. But always owning a business, that was, since I was 14. That's what I wanted to do. And then also probably 2 other interests were some kind of coaching. But I figured that would go more towards, I thought it would go more towards athletics because for me, I still am a hockey player, but hockey coaches when I was younger just had a massive impact on my life and made me a better man.
Mm.
And so I always had an interest to kind of help other people with that. Mm-hmm. But that, some kind of coaching and then getting into public service someday. I always kind of envisioned that, but more as I'm retired and now I can put 100% of my effort into that. I don't need to worry about paying the electric bill off of being in public service of some capacity.
Right. You're The wise old statesman.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day. Well, I mean, I've
Yeah.
toyed with this idea too. I'm a little older than you, so
How old are you?
I'm almost 50.
Really? You know,
Yeah.
it must be the webcam. You must have
It's the webcam. Yeah.
the
Everyone's
webcam's making
gotta
you
get-
look better.
Yeah. Everyone's got to get the Logi HD 1080p and you'll look 20 years younger. And they don't even
secret.
pay me to say that. Right. But no, I mean, I've toyed with that idea as well, because I've had some experience in politics here in San Francisco, and the frustrations with that are immense. And you can imagine, I think you're in Florida.
Mhm.
So the politics in Florida are a little different than here in California, and different. They're the same problems, just manifest in its different way. And
Yeah.
it is funny that you bring up the coaching aspect, because, when I was in high school, I played soccer, which, is European football, and had some great coaches. And, my dad also coached the soccer team that I was on when we were kids. And the power of a good coach, especially athletics. And I know people are like, oh, it's about, the winning and losing. And there's a bad connotation about that. But I always found that the coaches that I've had have been really instrumental in also making me a better man. I mean, just how to play fair, how to work as a team, how to handle loss, how to handle not giving up. Yeah, not giving up. Another great one. Or, hey, you didn't put the practice in, you're going to suffer on game day. And and I had this coach in high school. It was my varsity soccer team. It was Coach Woodall, and we called him Woody, and everyone called him Woody. And this guy, he would run with us. Like, he was that intense, and he was fast. And, he was also the cross country coach, I think, or he put it. But I remember there were these Woodyisms that I just remember, it just burned in my brain because it was so monumental. And all these little Woodyisms were just these manifestations of how much he cared for us and trying to impart how to be a better man, which is lost nowadays. Honestly, I'll probably get a lot of hate for this, but I don't think we teach young boys how to be proper men anymore. I mean, I just don't see it. And a lot of that, I
agree with that.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, is because of this. I don't know. There's a lot of tension amongst all that. But his best saying was "Get your butt out of your ass." And we're like, Woody, that's an oxymoron. And that's how he would say these things all the time.
Yeah.
I remember one time we had this thing called repeat hill. I mean, you play hockey, so you are always on the ice, but we had to go do hill runs.
Oh, we had to do that too.
Oh, okay. So maybe
similar,
did.
Yeah,
similar. Yeah. So we had repeat hill. Because we were in the hills of Belmont, California, and we had this repeat hill. And he's like, "Okay, guys, whoever pukes on my shoe can quit." And you're like, "Okay, I guess this is going to be hard." And just stuff like that, where we bonded because we were all in the suffering together, and it was fun. And those lessons are amazing. What are some of the lessons?
35 years later, that stuff still sticks with you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean,
yeah.
So for you, were there any things like that when you were playing hockey, or I mean, you're still playing hockey, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, now it's like adult league, they call it beer league or whatever. We don't know. We're all terrible,
but fun, right? It's all fun.
Yeah, it's fun, and there's a lot of sportsmanship, and I think a lot of being a man stuff comes out in sport. But no, I honestly don't remember anything in particular that they said to me. It was just, be a good, don't be a sore loser, just small stuff like that. And not just the hockey coaches, teachers as well. Even though I dropped out of high school, there were teachers that they just had an impact on me. Be a good person, treat everybody equally. My parents, they did that stuff too. And then I've had mentors. I've had business mentors that taught me stuff like that, always treat the customer fair, just all that stuff. And so that's what drove me to. Again, I don't remember anything I'm terrible at remembering quotes, terrible at remembering names and authors and stuff like that. But I'm able to take away the big lesson there. So that's the impact they had on me, and that's why I always had that kind of that desire to do some kind of coaching or teaching. The only problem is that, especially amateur hockey coaches, unless you're going pro, you don't make any money at all.
Yeah. No, it's all for the love of the game.
It's all for the love of the game and just helping people. So that's why it was, and I didn't want to be poor. So that's why I focused on business, because I wanted to be able to turn on my heat whenever I wanted to and not be hungry.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got here now.
I mean, because I noticed on your website that you are starting to offer coaching or a program or some education on how you created your digital marketing agency.
Yes.
Is that sort of like that manifestation of this teaching and coaching desire?
Well, what happened? Yes, that is the end result of it. Over the years, though, I've done, like, I would meet people at industry events or whatever. Even when I didn't really have any financial success, the fact that I owned my own business and I was 23, 24, I would meet people that were maybe in their 30s and they were like, I want to start my own business. I don't even know where to start. What do I do? So I started mentoring people just that I had met out, that at industry events or whatever. And that kind of manifested itself into, well, everybody seems to want to start their own business. They want to, then I got the agency to work. So then I reached out to those people and I was like, hey, I'm going to put together like some, I think the very first version of my program, in quotes, version.
Yeah. Air quotes. Yeah.
Yeah. Was just a bunch of maybe 5 or 6 videos in Google Drive. Just recorded some quick videos with some quick lessons, threw them up on Google Drive. There was no website or anything. Reached out to those people that I had mentored before and was like, hey, couple $100, you get access to this. And then we'll do like a weekly call. And that was it. And then I had another version, and now I just launched the 3rd version of the program. So it continued. It's weird how it just continues to reiterate itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing that like sports also taught me, because now I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu is sort of my, trying to recapture some of the glory days. No, I know how bad I am. I just do it because it's fun. Yeah. But the whole learn, do, teach kind of methodology that really like instills in you a sense of, if I know something, I need to teach something. At least that's my philosophy, because the people, like the mentors I've had, the coaches, the teachers who took the time to like explain some of these things to me, or read a book, or someone took the time to write it down, or I take an online course or whatever, that just seems like a powerful way to kind of have this cycle of goodness, this continuing effort to make the world better. And I truly believe that entrepreneurship is the way that we're going to do that. I can't see a better way. I mean, you need governments and organizations and institutions to provide sort of the frameworks, the loose frameworks, kind of the guardrails for which to operate. Mm-hmm. Boy, I mean, helping people create businesses, helping them help other people, making communities more sustainable, more resilient, more inclusive, building up these real like pillars from the ground up just seems like, a great use of time. And not only that, I think the sports stuff helps with that, because, we're a team. Like, no, we can't do it alone.
We're all in this together. Yeah.
We're all in this together. And I know for a fact, the times when we were really, like when we were playing soccer and we were really vibing, is when we were working as a team. Once we started to kind of go the bad path where we're all being selfish or mad at each other, it just collapsed. I mean, it was so stark. It was just, what happened? Like, it's like, you guys weren't playing as a team, like, get your butt out of your ass. And you're like, whoa, stop, and just find, it's interesting that, you said that you dropped out of high school. Yep. And I do know a lot of people that have, the formal education process is a bit cumbersome. And I mean, people have talked about how it's basically just making like, factory workers, right, as online, and the creatives among us. Although I did get through high school and also went to college and grad school, it was hard for me. because I'm just like, I don't want to sit here and why do I have to learn this stuff?
Learning meaningless stuff.
Yeah. And like, in my style, it may be the same with you. And this is why I'm curious. Like learning styles differ a lot. And even with entrepreneurs, like some entrepreneurs, they're like, I just got to go grind it out. I got to do it. Others can read it in a book. Others hire a team. I mean, how has your learning style kind of impacted how you've run your business? And do you think that that moment where you're like, okay, this school stuff's just not for me, how did that feel? Like how did that all kind of pan out?
So it's kind of two very different reasons. Why I quit high school was actually why I dropped out was actually because of hockey. So it's just like everything was hitting me all at once in my life. The goal with hockey, even though I wasn't that good, I wanted to go to college. And when I was 13, 14, I'm starting to think, people are telling me like, you need to start thinking like, where are you going to go to college for? What do you want to go? What do you want to do? You don't have to make up your mind now, but you need to start thinking about it. And, my it wasn't in the cards for my parents to pay for college. So it was, I'm going to need to get a scholarship. Right. So my goal was just play as much hockey, try to get as good as I can so that I can get some kind of scholarship, even if it's at a D3 school, like not D1, because I'm certainly not that good, just some kind of scholarship so you can actually go to school.
Right.
And I was at this one game you could like mentor with the varsity team because I never even got to varsity. I was never old enough.
Right.
And I was at this one game and I'm watching a prep school from Pittsburgh, forget which school. And I'm watching them play and they're just so much better than me. And it hit me that like all of these people, like they're so much better than me because they started way earlier. Mm-hmm. I started playing when I was maybe like 10 or 11. I forget. They started playing when they were like 4 or 5, which it's only 5 years difference. But when you're that age, that makes a colossal difference.
It's like orders of magnitude each year.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
each
crazy.
year you get like 10 times better.
Yeah. That is amazing.
Yeah. So I realized that at the same time, I was starting to think like, I want to go into maybe business. That's what I want to go to college for. At the same time, I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad. So I'm starting to think of that. At the same time, I'm dating this girl where her dad and I got along really well. And he was like the vice president of like one of the biggest businesses in the area. So I had him influencing me. I'm reading this book. I'm like getting this realization that all these people, they're so much better than me because they started earlier. And I'm like, if I continue down this route, maybe I can get into college. Maybe I can get some kind of scholarship to pay for it. Then I'm going to be into business when I'm like 23, 24. But if I start doing that stuff now, I'll be like 10 years ahead of the game. So I know it's not going to be easy, but I'll be ahead of the game. So that's when I started my first business. And then I started taking all these business classes in school. And I'm correcting the teachers. They're teaching like the wrong stuff. And this is off of like reading 3 business books. And I'm like, you're completely wrong. Like what you're talking about is like 5 years ago, they changed the laws or whatever.
Right.
And so like all this stuff hits me at one time and I'm like, I'm going to, it wasn't, I was going to quit. I convinced my parents to let me do homeschooling and somehow they said yes. I paid for it. And never even opened the books, never even took a single test, and just focused on business. It was like I believe that if I start now, this is not going to be easy, but 10 years from now, I'll be 10 years ahead of the game. Everybody else that's getting out of college and is like, oh, I'm going to start my own business or I'm going into the business world. Sure, they might have a degree to show for it, but I'm going to have 10 years of experience to show for it.
Which,
arguably, I don't recommend that to anybody. It was absolutely stupid. Go to school, kids. Finish high school.
In some respects, it's not for everyone, and you got to have a backup plan, right? Like I
I didn't have a backup plan. There was no backup.
Have a backup plan, clearly.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I work with a bunch of professional athletes. And as you can imagine, professional athletes, their whole lives have been focused on sports. And so they're like the cream of the crop. You know, I work with 2 NFL athletes right now. I used to work with a couple more. But boy, like you go in their neighborhood where they're from, and typically they're one of the only ones that made it out, like quote unquote made it out. Yeah. And, you know, they were focused. Okay, I'm going to do sports. But then they start to realize it's like, well, what happens when I retire or I get hurt? Like, I got to do something else. Like, what's my backup plan? But that's it's an interesting point, because a lot of the time, the focus on sports or one single thing, or like, you know, burn the boats and just we're going for it. The focus, as you saw, like you focused on one business, you know, after all the ones that you talked about, and it started to be successful. Focus is important, but not, I think, to the detriment of, you know, your whole life. I mean, your whole life, right? I mean, I know there was Elizabeth Holmes, who was the CEO of Theranos, the notorious Theranos that is now completely defunct, and she's being prosecuted for fraud.
Oh,
you know, she because they made a lot of stuff up. And anyway, her whole thing was, no, just there's only plan A. And I'm like, you know, that's actually a really dumb thing to say. I mean, you may have a focus, but you got to know, like, you got to have the fallback. I mean, every great tactician, every great strategist, every great warrior, every great like generals, like, I got a backup plan in case the world's gonna, like, you know, oh my gosh, there's cloud cover. Now what? You know, I mean, like, you gotta adjust, right? You gotta adapt and overcome. And what's interesting is that when we were talking a little bit before, is that you're a big fan of the Stoics. How and this is all coming towards, you know, you didn't have a backup plan, but you adjusted, right? And yeah. Were you, as a young person, like more of a Stoic, or did that Stoicism kind of come out of, oh wow, I may need to adjust some things, and I really don't know what I'm doing?
Stoicism, that really just I picked up a book somewhere and just read the first paragraph, and I was like, wow, this can maybe guide me. And for me, the main takeaway, all I take away, no, let me correct myself. There are 2 things that I take away from Stoicism. One is, and I'm going to mispronounce it, memento mori.
Yeah.
Remember mortality. You're going to die.
You're going to die.
You know, yep. So recognize that, always be mindful of that. Mm-hmm. That helps me with like my meditation and showing appreciation. Mm-hmm. It's like, I appreciate every moment because I recognize that I'm not guaranteed the next one. And the other main thing I take away from it is just simply not making emotional decisions. Always just, recognize and accept your emotions. Whether it's anger, sadness, happiness, love, lust, could be anything. Recognize those emotions, but when you're making decisions, try to make the logical decision. And that I mean, there's a lot to say with death in regards to that, like being logical about death, or. But yeah, when it comes to making business decisions or whatever, where you're under pressure, always think, am I making the emotional decision, or is this the logical decision? That's the 2 main things that I apply with Stoicism to my life. I would like to jump back though. You mentioned about burning the bridges and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I believe you have to walk a fine line. I think if you have nothing to lose, then burn every bridge. And when you're up against, you need to, if you were struggling to feel that fight and the motivation, then I think it's a good idea to burn all bridges, and failure becomes, there is no other, you can't fail. There's a story of you mentioned a general. There's a story of a general who, this might be fiction or not, where they go to battle and it's like on an island, and when they get there, they burn all the boats, and like all the soldiers are panicking, like, oh, like, what if we need to retreat? And the general's like, and you might know who this actually is. I don't know where this story comes from, but he's like, oh, well, you better win then, because there is no retreating. I removed that option.
Yeah. I think that might have been a Spartan.
Yeah, Spartan.
Well, there's a couple of them like that where,
you burn the bridge, you burn the boats. Failure not becomes now. Like with your athletes and whatnot, where realizing that whatever you're working on is going to end. I think that's a little different. It's definitely smart. You want to have like, hey, I recognize I'm not going to be an NFL athlete forever. I need to have a plan after that. I think that is smart. But whenever you don't really have success going yet, and you're trying to make something work, moving failure as an option can really light a fire. Yeah.
I mean, I always say failure is not really an option. Well, failure is an option, but it's never the final result, because for me, the failure just leads to the next opportunity. So what's interesting about the whole burning the boats and burning the bridges and everything is that failure is relative to where you're at, right? I mean, life and death is different. You either survive or you die. Okay. So we take life and death out of it, which we will. The rest of it is just a series of learning experiments. And you're right. If you're young and you got really nothing to lose, and you can, place some bets, and, okay, this failed, that failed. It's not really failing. You're building up these skill stacks or these talent stacks.
Agree.
To kind of, because each quote unquote failure is really just the next evolution of the learning. And I found in it, as a young person, this is a hard thing to swallow, because you're like, gosh, I just want to like get something under my belt, right? I got to feel like I'm making some progress,
But those failures, I like the direction you're going here, because I have failed way more, 10, 20, 30 times more than I have succeeded, air quotes, succeeded.
Yeah, right.
So it's not, I think if we're specifically talking about business, where I see you have these people who they start their first business, and maybe like a month into it, like things aren't taking off or whatever, and it's like, welcome to the game.
Yes,
that's how it is. It might take 30 iterations of your business, or it might this business you're working on might completely fail.
Yeah,
it's you keep going until you have that business success. You just keep beating at your craft until you succeed. So as an athlete, you might lose the game. Right. You might have a losing season, but you still go to the gym. You still go to practice. You don't give up. You keep going. For me, that's where the failure is not an option. You're going to you might lose battles, but you don't ever give up on the war.
Right. No, true. And I'm glad you clarified that, because there's the bluster of failure is not an option. We're just going to crush, like if you're, of the Jocko Willink mindset, which is not really his. Jocko. Yeah. Which is not, it's subtly that way, but he's way more nuanced than that, because he understands, well, you got to pivot, zig and zag, and, a cover and move is like he likes to say, and you got to adjust, because again, the world is so random, or it can be so random, that you can never anticipate everything that'll happen. You just can't. And so like the best example is COVID, right? So what really like struck me about COVID, and I remember, in San Francisco, we shut down March 15th was like the weekend of March 14th and 15th. Everyone's like, hey, Monday, shelter in place, right? So I remember I was with my fiance Minerva, and we're at the store, and chaos. I mean, absolute chaos. Lines. There's no toilet paper. There's this whole and I'm like, because I'm like, is this really that bad? Is it just the flu, right? And then I'm like, oh my gosh. I need to adjust my thinking pretty quickly because wow. And then I started to realize it's like within a week or within a day, a couple of days, right? All those businesses that relied on foot traffic, that relied on in-person, travel, conferences, all of them, like overnight, 90%, 100% of their business is gone.
Yep.
And you're like, wow, well, therein lies the lesson, right? The lesson of, well, if clearly at nothing, you couldn't have done anything to prevent that. But how you react to it is your thing about, well, failure is not an option because I am going to figure out a way to make this work. Is it going to be virtual conferences? I'm like, whatever I'm going to do, I got to figure this out. And I'm not going to quit, which is also what sports, like we talked about, the sports taught me, is even when you're losing, don't quit. Keep putting out the perfect effort. Keep putting the effort out. Because in sports, as you know, sometimes the last minute of the game, you win it. You're like, how did that happen? We had more heart, right? We we didn't give up. I remember we were playing a game. It was like the last quarter and we were down like 2-0. And like, it's, in soccer, that's like a blowout, right? I mean, like no one ever scores, right? That's why Americans don't like it as much. But I remember, right. And hockey,
that's why.
That's why, because it's so boring, right? But it's the beautiful game. You got to love the beautiful game. But I remember it's like, everyone's a little dejected, but then one guy, he's like, I'm not going to give up, and I'm just going to keep hustling and hustling and hustling. And I remember you could see the other team was sort of slacking a little bit because they're like, we're up 2-0, right? All of a sudden, we score. Now it's 2-1. Now the momentum, like when people talk about sports momentum and they're like, what does that really mean? It's a real thing. Real. It's a real, because just like in battle, like the tide of battle can be turned by individuals pulling the collective together, pulling the troops together, and really like stellar performance. And this guy scored, and we're like, hey, we got a shot.
We could tie this.
We could tie this, right? We just kept on going and kept on going. Then boom, we scored another goal. So now it's 2-2. We've got 5 minutes left. And it's like, wow. And we just felt like on top of the world. And because we didn't give up. And because when, as you know, right, when the clutch players, the clutch players in all sports, and even in business, you see this in business too, like those salespeople that just won't give up, the biz dev person that's just like dogging the deal, maybe some of your clients or your team that's just like, God, we got to get this done. It's like, this is so important. That little bit of extra effort, that I'm not going to quit until the game's over, that sportsmanship, that perfect effort, I'm just going to keep going until I can't go anymore. The best thing an entrepreneur can do. I mean, sometimes you lose the game, right? Man. Sometimes you lose the game, But then you get the lesson. Like you get 100%.
You have to realize, like, even if you lost, even if your business closes down, even if it fails or whatever, which again, me personally, I can sit there and I could say I have failed a lot more than I have succeeded. I still tried to take a lesson away from all those things. But for me, where the burning the bridge comes from is like again, it's a fine line. You have to walk the
100%.
It is a thin line where if you have that backup plan or something like that, or you like, I didn't have parents who were going to pay my mortgage or something like that. Well, if I didn't make it work, I would go hungry. There would be no food.
Yeah.
Right, and a lot of people, they have that, they keep that backup plan and they give up. They give up in the third quarter.
Yeah.
Because, well, we're not going to win. And it's like, no, you don't give up until there's nothing left to give.
Yeah. Until the buzzer sounds, right?
Until the buzzer sounds. And then if you still lose, well, then you evaluate what was the lesson, and you go back to the next game. You go back to battle again. You don't give up. There's a lot to be said about that, man.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I mean, what's interesting about, like my family's the same way. I mean, my parents weren't going to, pay my mortgage or, help me out, because just they didn't have the means. I mean, it's not that we were hungry or anything, but it's like, hey, we got our thing, you do your thing. And it's not that, like, I think the level of discomfort and the level of, what you really need to survive. A lot of people that haven't like gone down that path of like, oh, I can't eat today. How am I going to make my mortgage? Oh, I got to work a double shift. When you do that, then you're kind of, you level set what you can handle.
Your pain threshold.
Your pain threshold, right? And I think the Stoics similar, right?
It's very
they like always up how much you can tolerate, and then obviously don't let the emotions get to you. But when you have that mentality and you have that hustle and you have been like conditioned to be like, okay, we don't give up till the game's over. The one, it's freeing. I think it's just this freedom that's pretty amazing and hard to explain, but also, what you need to survive is not as much as some people think, right? So if you've never had the means, if you've never were rich or whatever, like the level of what you need to survive is pretty low. I mean, to be honest, right? It's like, well, I can live on ramen and I'm good, right? Like it's not like,
that's absolutely fine. I'm fine with just a glass of tap water.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that was the other thing, during this whole pandemic thing where, you really see a lot of people struggling, but then also kind of pulling together and reassessing like what matters. And I'm curious, as you've been through this journey, have you kind of assessed what really matters to you? And I know now you're successful and, you have a successful digital marketing business, but how has that assessment been? Have you reflected on that?
So I would say for me, there's two things. I continuously try to practice gratitude towards everything. So, I look at things like this is something I teach students to a certain degree. Is I hear a lot of people, they say, especially with business, like, well, I don't have like rich parents that I can borrow money off of to start my business or whatever. And they're like, I come from a poor family. And I'm like, you're lucky for that. The worst thing that can possibly happen to somebody is that they become comfortable.
Oh yeah.
The comfort is an absolutely terrible thing.
Oh yeah.
Coming from, I consider myself so lucky that I came from a small, relatively poor country town in Pennsylvania. I didn't come from, I look at people who their parents are millionaires and they're going to get $1 million whenever they die or they have a trust fund. And I'm like, I feel so bad for that person.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Because they've never wanted, they've never struggled. So that deep fire just isn't there because they've never tested that pain threshold. They don't know what real struggle is. So for me, I continuously, I don't even know what your original question was, to be honest, but
no,
I continuously feel this
this is good anyway. Just keep going.
I continuously feel this gratitude that, like, that shit that I went through when I was $1 million in debt, losing sleep, like, how am I going to get out of this mess? I am so thankful that I went through that.
Yeah.
In the moment, I think this was probably the big shift because I had that kind of stoicism background, and before it like reached its peak badness in my life, I was like in those moments. I specifically remember the low point for me was I had this flip. I was doing a flip house. I bought this house for like $35,000, and I ended up losing money on the deal. I ended up losing like $3 or $4 grand. But I couldn't, I had like maxed out all my credit cards. So I'm like trying to finish the project, but I'm like, I don't have any more money. So like, I'm trying to cut corners as much as I can. So I wouldn't turn the AC on. This house is in Florida. It's like July or something like that. It's 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And I'm in the ceiling, I think was popcorn. They call it popcorn ceiling or whatever. And I forget what, for some reason I was taking a spray bottle, like to scrape it off. The best way is to like get it wet and then you scrape it off. And dude, it's just everywhere. Like that was like 6 years ago. That was 2015.
Wow.
And I remember sitting there and I'm like drenched in sweat. I'm covered in drywall. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm in this moment right now. Like this sucks, but I'm glad because dude, this is pretty bad. and if I hadn't gone through that, like that pushed my pain threshold. So by pushing that pain threshold, when I go through other struggles, it's like, well, it wasn't as bad as that.
Could always be worse.
It could always be worse.
It could always be worse. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like lifting or something like that. Like if you 100 pounds might be heavy to somebody, but if you continue to lift 100 pounds and then you lift 150 pounds and then you lift 200 pounds, all of a sudden 100 pounds becomes pretty light to you because you increased your pain threshold, your tolerance. And again, I have no idea what the original question was or why I went off on that, but yeah, that's
well, I mean, that's
my
the whole
answer.
Yeah.
That's whatever the question was.
That's the obstacle is the way of stoicism, where you embrace the struggle and being comfortable with being uncomfortable with the situation you're in, which is something that I've always tried to champion. And, it's not like you got to suffer all the time, right? I mean, there's a certain part, of course, we all don't want to be masochists, but when you struggle and you push the limit of your tolerance, then you'll learn a little bit more about yourself. Then your threshold of pain and suffering goes up a little bit. Now, there's times where you completely collapse and you can't, handle it. And that's when you need a team and your tribe and, to support yourself, which I'm sure if you 100%. Absolutely hit rock bottom, I'm sure your mom and dad would be like, okay, come on.
Here's some ramen for you.
Here's some ramen, let's take a break and figure out what the hell you really need to do with it. I mean, I always had that with my parents. I mean, the desire to not do that was really, really strong to not go back home. But I mean, that's what a tribe's all about. That's what people that love you all are about. That's what that support network, of community of entrepreneurs where, we got each other's back, right? Because that's important. Because this job is a hard job, right?
I think we've kind of conditioned as a society where I don't think the bigger problem is getting through the bottom. The bigger problem is once you start to go up and you start to get success, whether that's athletic success or financial success or whatever, you lose sight of the bottom. You forget what the bottom looks like.
Oh, that's
so in Stoicism, what is it? Like once a month, you're supposed to wear the cheapest fare, or basically like once a month, you're supposed to wear terrible clothes. Yeah. You're supposed to eat the cheapest food. You're supposed to like sleep on the floor with like just no pillow.
Yeah.
You don't have to go. I mean, everybody's got different extremes, but in Stoicism, they talk about this kind of like pushing your limit and reminding yourself of, I can get through the badness. There's where a particular story that I remember with Stoicism is, and I don't remember, it might be Marcus Aurelius. I don't remember who it is, but for those of you who don't know, like he was one of the emperors, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So no matter who it was,
we'll fact check that.
Fact check me after this. I'm going to butcher the story, but the story that I took away from it was you have this emperor, which back then, and these people were gods.
Yeah,
they could walk out onto the street, murder somebody, and nobody would question them. They were worshipped like gods. And like once a month, he would sneak out of the palace or whatever they called it, and like live with the poor, live with for like just one night or whatever, live with the poor, eat their food, live on the street, sleep on the street, to condition yourself to, one, feel gratitude, how lucky you are, how lucky you have it, and just be like, I could lose it all and I could still get through it.
Yeah.
So whenever you know, people can go through struggle, your Mercedes might get repoed, or you might not be able to eat organic foods and you might need to go to ramen noodles. Like, conditioning yourself that like, I can survive that is a very, very, very powerful tool. And as I've seen a lot of people where they start to get success and they forget that. So that then whenever maybe things start to slide a little bit, they panic. Because I wouldn't be able to survive off of ramen, but it's like, you did once, or I guarantee you could.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the bigger. Most people can be conditioned to handle the struggles when they're starting out, but it's really whenever you start to get success that you lose sight of the bottom.
Yeah. Well, Dylan, I think that's a great place to end. I really, really appreciate your time, and it's great to get to know you. Such a insightful discussion.
I wish I could articulate the whole stoic experience a little better, but I hope that helps.
Oh yeah.
People.
I mean, you've got time, my friend. You've got time. So, all right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it. My hope is that you learned something that can make you a little bit better. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do share it with friends and review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also join my email list by visiting theentrepreneurethos.com to get my thoughts on what I'm doing to get better, as well as what I'm working on. You can also pick up my book, The Entrepreneur Ethos, if you want to learn the traits, values, and beliefs that I think we need to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient entrepreneur and, frankly, world community. Feel free to follow me on Twitter @TheDailyMBA and let me know if you have any questions or recommendations for a guest you'd like me to talk to. Also, drop me a note if you try anything we talked about on this or any other episode. I'd love to hear what's working for you. Until next time, keep getting better.